Thank you for inviting me.
So we first met, I remember it was 2019. You were just wrapping up, you were an executive in the medical device industry. You were at a transition point and you were exploring your next opportunities. And you decided you wanted to get into your own business, but that you wanted to buy an existing business. And you did. You bought an up and running existing franchise, and then you sold it. And then we've worked together here again, and you're buying your second existing franchise. So could you just tell us a little bit about what was the first business you bought? How long did you own it? You sold it. And then what is this next business that you're buying?
Absolutely. And it has been a tremendous ride and a lot of fun. And yeah, I look back and it's been a whirlwind. But the first business was a health and safety company. It's a franchise business. And it was a business that could be performing better than it had been. It hadn't been living up to its potential, but it was in a space that matched my background, my medical device background in infection prevention, positioned me to where that seemed very, very attractive to me. I could see future clients that I would be calling on. It just so happened that I bought the business right before COVID really became it shut our country down and it shut our state down. And while I took over right as COVID was starting, a lot of my business had gone away because of closures. It forced me to pivot. It forced me to think about other areas for growth. And it really pushed me to expand that business. And in the end, I owned it for nearly 3 years. And I was able to exit that at a great time. I was looking to make another transition in my career. And now I'm entering into the home care space with an existing franchise and very, very excited for that opportunity.
Congratulations. I know
Thank you.
the ink is fresh for you on your new acquisition. And what you're doing, what you've done, and what you're continuing to do is a very attractive idea to a lot of people. I get requests about exploring buying an up and running business, whether it's inside or outside of a franchise. And it makes sense. There are a lot of benefits to taking over a company that already has staff, already has employees, or already has customers. But there's some realities to that, as you have known a couple of times around now. There's
Right.
wrinkles, right? And it's not sometimes all unicorns and roses as people think buying and existing is going to be. So I want us to spend a few minutes talking about the realities.
Absolutely. And when you're buying a business that may be underperforming expectations, while that presents a great upside opportunity, you also have to recognize that it's underperforming for a reason. And sometimes it is personnel, and sometimes it's processes, sometimes it's mindset on, well, we can't do that. And it's always what you can't do versus looking at an opportunity and finding a solution. And it really sometimes goes back to the old adage that if you're not part of the solution, you're part of the problem. And so while it is great to instantly have customers, instantly have revenue, you also have to step back and take a good hard look at your entire situation. What is working? What is not working? And then triage and prioritize what needs my attention right away, and then what can be put off for a month, a few months, and then what are those things that you'll do as time allows down the road. They're non-critical items to the effectiveness of your business.
Did you find in your first acquisition, and do you expect in your second one, that you're going to have to invest more money beyond the purchase price to fix it or to grow it? Just thoughts around, added investment that's going to be
That's a
required.
great point, Leslie. And you and I have spoken about this a bit. My advice to someone looking to do this is, especially if you're buying a franchise, when you buy a franchise, the franchisor will tell you this is what you need for working capital and various investments. My advice and my experience has been you're far better to be overfunded for things like working capital and at times overinvest early on beyond what is in the required disclosure. Because again, that's something that the government regulates. And so franchisors, and I've had the opportunity to work with a few great franchisors, there's only so much they can put in there. And I found I did this on my first business and I'm doing it again now by being overfunded on working capital. You're not worried about little things like, can I make payroll? Because everything is cut so close. You can invest and invest in the long term and have the ability sometimes to make a mistake or two because you're going to make mistakes. And if you are so tight on your finances, every mistake gets compounded. It's psychologically and mentally negative, and that builds upon itself. And that sometimes might force you to make an even worse decision down the road. So it's never a bad situation to be overfunded. Um, Interest rates are a little better now than they were 4 years ago, so you can earn a little bit on your money that's sitting there. But it really helps to make good decisions on how to grow your business because it's about the growth. You want your business to grow because it's going to bring you more money, more income, more enjoyment and satisfaction. But also when you exit, your investment is now worth that much more.
Yeah. And you mentioned the pandemic, and boy, was that a lesson for everybody, small businesses especially, that you need to have a cash reserve, whether it's to grow the business or just because stuff happens. And you don't want to have to make short-term decisions based on you're shortchanged on cash that is going to affect you in the long term. So it's just better to go with more cash than you hope you're going to need with whatever.
Absolutely. And whether that's cash that you're bringing in from your retirement funds or your personal savings, friends and family even, or lines of credit or SBA loans. There's lots of opportunities to get capital, and it makes sense to have multiple avenues to pursue. The hardest thing the worst time to get money is when you need it. When you don't need money, everyone will throw money at you. And sometimes it makes sense to take that and allow you to make those decisions. Having bought right as the pandemic was starting and exploding, all of the government assistance, the CARES Act and everything there, well, I wasn't eligible for that because I hadn't owned my business prior to the pandemic. And so what that also taught me is when things happen, sometimes there are lifelines that are thrown out, but you may not be eligible to grab onto that life preserver to keep your business afloat. And that's what you need to do. You're now responsible not only to yourself and your family, but your employees as well.
Al, let's talk about valuations for a couple minutes. So you have come to a meeting of the mind with a seller of a franchise business twice now, and this is one of the biggest areas that I hear people kind of struggle with. How do you get to the price to buy the business? People are oftentimes looking for a textbook guidance or answer to that. And I've heard many a business broker say, at the end of the day, the value of a business is what the buyer will buy it for and what the seller will sell it for. And it doesn't necessarily fit into a neat formula around that. What will you weigh in on just your experience or thoughts about people, trying to get to a value of the business they're going to buy?
Yeah, absolutely, Leslie. And I did have a background in mergers and acquisitions in my medical device background. So I was used to trying to value businesses and business opportunities. And there are so many different ways to do that. And one of the best ways is if the company is generating positive cash flow, you can do what is termed the owner's benefit. So you can look at not only the bottom line to the business on a P&L, but there are things that you add back in there to get what is the true benefit to the owner if they weren't expensing this, that, or the other thing. And then it becomes a multiples game. And it's not a set number. There are ranges for every industry. So I would advise that you look at what those multiples will be in your industry. Oftentimes in services, it might be 2 to 3 times the owner's benefit is what that valuation would be. But again, you have to have a meeting of the minds to agree to what that number is. In my experience, before I was able to buy my first franchise, I actually had a deal, a verbal deal to buy a different franchise. And it was not profitable in generating cash. So my banker that I was working with could not put a value on it because the traditional metrics that bankers use weren't they weren't going to work. It was a worthless business to that banker. But I was able to look at things, look at what the future cash flow would be. Don't ever give away all your hard work creating a present value of your work in the future, because that's value you will be making for yourself. But we had a deal. But in this case, the seller was trying to recoup everything that they had put into the business, and that was just not going to be feasible. We had a meeting of we came to an agreement. 2 weeks later, our opinions changed. And so you have to look at just a lot of different things. You can look at what are the assets that you're acquiring. What would it cost you to replicate that? It's almost like a replacement cost for something with an insurance. Okay, you have to buy the franchise fee and put this and so forth. So there is a tangible value that you can attribute to the business. And some of it is just basic negotiation skills. Know where you'll go, know what your maximum and minimum are, know what things you value the most, but also try to understand what the other person values. Because sometimes there's something that they value much more than you. And so you can throw that into a deal and they're very excited. And to you, it was a nothing. And there's just, it comes down to basic negotiating skills. But there's a lot to read about in this, and you actually helped provide me some information back in 2019, and it's very, very valuable to use that, because there's a lot of emotion as well. Someone is selling their baby, their business that they have grown and nurtured, and they don't like it if you come in and give them a price that they feel might be a lowball offer, even if it's true. So you've got to play to those emotions as well.
And to that, you have to be prepared for the emotions that you're going to have as a buyer of this. Like you mentioned, what you mentioned about how 2 weeks before closing, Seller changes their mind. That happens all the time. So I think people, especially looking at buying an existing business, has to be prepared for the fact that you're probably going to have to look at a lot of businesses, and you might have time and money sunk into due diligence, and then something changes and you got to be prepared to walk away and be okay with that.
You're absolutely right. And that's why it is important to understand your skills, what your interests are. Uh, you will be presented with many, many opportunities in lines of work that you've never contemplated in your life. But if you look at what the skills you need to be successful in that line of work and that business, and match it to yourself and be honest. You have to be very honest with yourself on what you do well and what you don't do well, and know where your blind spots are. Um, but you cannot be overly emotional through all of this. And I know I've looked at so many different business opportunities over the years, and many of them were very interesting. But when I looked at it, they weren't going to be matches for me. They weren't going to be matches for my goals and where I want myself and my family and my career to be in the future.
I'm hearing from you that success in this starts with a lot of self reflection, self evaluation, self clarity. So you can filter in and out. Good opportunities may be a good opportunity, but the real question is, does it align with what you know you need for you? So that
Absolutely, Leslie. I know some of the businesses that I've looked at and I've been involved in. I come from a marketing background as well. And so you assume, oh, you can be the salesperson, you can be the marketer, but you have to look and say, well, how are sales conducted? Is marketing conducted? And sometimes that is going door to door and knocking on doors and cold calling people. And if you are not comfortable with that sales process, then this will never work for you unless you hire someone to do that job. And so if you're going to do that, well, there are many other jobs in the company and many other hats you're wearing, but do the finances for the business allow it? Do your finances allow it? When you're an entrepreneur, you're often doing many things, excuse me, you're often doing many things yourself. And so you have to know where your skills lie.
yeah. Al, you've already given so much good wisdom here that will benefit all who watch our conversation. But I'll ask you for any last comments, just anything that you would really impart to others who, today are in the shoes that you were in 2019. Anything that you feel is important that you'd like to pass along?
Yeah, when you're working with a coach and someone, you have to have a great relationship with that person. You have to be honest with them as well as with yourself. And you have to have the ability, and again, don't get emotional. Somebody presents you with something, if it's not going to work or you just don't see it, say that right up front, so that you're not wasting a lot of time and energy, because there are countless opportunities ahead. So have a great relationship with your coach. Make sure they understand you. Take that time up front. Everyone wants to dive right in. And I'll say, for having now been involved with two different franchises, when a friend of mine, a former boss, told me that I should look into franchising, like a lot of people, my first assumption was, okay, fries, fast food. And there are thousands and thousands of opportunities in franchise businesses that have nothing to do with the food service industry. So again, understand yourself, understand your goals, There are great businesses that might plateau at a certain level and then a certain owner's benefit. And if that's your wildest dreams, then that works for you. If your dreams are different, then you need to find a business that can scale to your dreams. Find that match. You don't need to rush into things, but have a great partner like I've had with you, Leslie, to get there.
Well, thank you. And it's an ongoing relationship. You're a serial entrepreneur, Al. So I have a feeling that we'll be at some point in the future working on your third opportunity. And I look forward to that.
Well, I hope so, but time will tell.